My niece texted me, "You're not welcome at my graduation. You'll ruin the vibe." My brother said I'd embarrass her in front of rich families. So I calmly pulled the Ivy League tuition I'd been. My name is Samuel Parker, and for most of my life I was the quiet one in my family, the reliable one, the man who fixed problems without announcing it. The one they called when rent was due, when credit cards were maxed out, when dreams were too expensive to chase alone. I never married, never had kids, and my family liked to joke that my money had nowhere else to go. So it might as well go to them. I laughed along, because at the time I thought love meant endurance, and sacrifice meant silence. When my brother Elijah and his wife Sophia told me their daughter Julia had been accepted into an Ivy League school, the room exploded with celebration, tears, prayers, promises, and then silence, the kind of silence that waits for one person to speak up. That person was me. Before I continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. Happy New Year! I offered to help with tuition, not fully realizing that help would quietly turn into me paying everything. $80,000 a year, 3 years straight, housing, books, fees, donations, emergency expenses, I covered it all. Because they promised they would chip in later, and Julia herself promised she would pay me back once she graduated and started working. For 3 years I paid without missing a deadline, without asking questions, without demanding receipts, while Elijah upgraded his SUV, Sophia posted luxury brunch photos, and Julia sent me carefully worded thank you texts that felt more like formal emails than affection. I ignored the unease in my chest because I told myself I was investing in her future, and maybe also buying a place in a family that had always treated me like the backup plan rather than a priority. The conflict didn't start with a fight. It started with a text message, short, sharp, and cruel. Julia messaged me late one night, telling me I was not welcome at her graduation, saying I would ruin the vibe, calling me a loser who never did anything with his life. Minutes later, Elijah echoed it in a separate message, saying Julia needed space, that I should understand, that my presence might embarrass her in front of her classmates' successful families. I remember staring at my phone, rereading the words, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my chest. Not anger at first, but heartbreak. I replied calmly, telling them I understood, and then I added one more sentence, that I would be pulling my tuition payments effective immediately. They laughed at me, literally laughed, sending voice notes and emojis, telling me I was too soft to ever follow through, reminding me how much Julia depended on me, how close graduation was, how heartless I would be to stop now. They assumed my kindness was weakness, and that assumption became their downfall. The next morning I contacted the university's financial aid office, provided documentation, froze all future payments, and requested a full audit of the account tied to my name. The woman on the phone was polite, professional, and unmoved by the family drama behind the numbers. Within days, Julia's senior year enrollment was placed on hold pending payment. No capstone clearance, no graduation approval, no exceptions. That's when the threats started. Elijah called me screaming. Sophia sent paragraphs accusing me of destroying their daughter's life. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly cared deeply about family unity. I stayed quiet, not because I was scared, but because for the first time I realized silence was power. The louder they became, the calmer I felt. The story spread through the family like wildfire, but not the version I expected. People started asking questions, real ones, about how long I'd been paying, how much I'd covered, why Elijah and Sophia never contributed. Julia, who had proudly believed her parents were co-sponsors of her education, finally asked for proof, and that's when the truth cracked open. Elijah panicked and tried to fix things the way he always did, by lying. He impersonated my assistant in an email to the school, attempting to reinstate payments, but he used the wrong signature, the wrong phrasing, and forgot that Ivy League offices verify everything. The university flagged the attempt as fraud, and suddenly Elijah wasn't just an angry brother. He was a man under administrative review, barred from contacting the institution, and quietly reported to an ethics committee tied to his workplace. Julia showed up at my door weeks later, not confident, not arrogant, but hollowed out, eyes swollen, voice shaking. She admitted her parents had lied to her for years, telling her they were paying half, that I was only assisting, that my role was minor. She cried as she realized the life she'd been living was built on deception, and she asked me for a loan to cover the remaining balance so she could graduate. I said no. Not cruelly, not loudly, just no. For weeks she begged, sent letters, voice notes, apologies that sounded rehearsed at first, then slowly became real. I watched her learn humility in real time, and only then did I agree, not as an uncle, but as a lender. I drafted a formal loan agreement, $25,000, interest included, strict deadlines, and a clause stating that default would result in public disclosure of the debt and the full tuition history. She signed without hesitation. I did not attend the graduation. Instead, I mailed a graduation cap to her apartment. Inside it a detailed, itemized bill of the $200,000 I had paid over 3 years, every transfer, every fee, every receipt, stamped boldly with the words paid in full. The family lost its mind. Group chats exploded, relatives whispered, friends asked questions Elijah and Sophia couldn't answer without lying, and the lies were finally too heavy to carry. 6 months later, Julia began making consistent payments, small but steady, with messages that were no longer entitled, but grateful. Elijah and Sophia stopped speaking to me entirely, but not before the consequences finished unfolding. Elijah's workplace suspended him during the fraud review, promotions vanished, trust evaporated, and Sophia's carefully curated social image collapsed when people started connecting she could no longer erase. I didn't celebrate. Revenge didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet clarity. I had finally taught them that generosity without respect is exploitation, and silence does not mean consent. To this day, family gatherings feel different. Conversations pause when I enter, because they remember, they can't unsee what happened, and they know I am no longer the man they can use without consequence. The payments didn't start immediately, and that was the first real test of who Julia had become. The first due date passed with silence, then another, and I said nothing. I wanted her to feel the weight of the agreement without me hovering over it like a threat. On the 3rd week she finally sent the payment, followed by a message that wasn't dramatic or defensive, just a simple acknowledgement that she understood now what responsibility felt like. Elijah did not take it well. He began calling extended family, painting himself as the betrayed brother, telling them I had turned money into a weapon and used it to control his daughter. Normally that tactic would have worked, because our family had always believed the loudest voice was the most truthful one. This time, however, I responded only once, and I responded with facts. I sent a single email to the family group, attaching bank statements, tuition invoices, payment timelines, and screenshots of promises that were never kept. I added no insults, no commentary, just dates, figures, and proof, and then I muted the conversation permanently. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't dismissive silence, it was stunned silence. Relatives who had accused me of cruelty quietly deleted their messages. A few sent private apologies, awkward and brief. Elijah's version of the story collapsed under its own weight, because lies don't survive receipts, especially not when the numbers are that large. Then came the final attempt at manipulation. Elijah showed up at my place unannounced, older, angrier, desperate in a way I had never seen before. He accused me of humiliating him, of ruining his reputation, of choosing money over blood. I let him talk until he ran out of words, and then I told him calmly that I hadn't ruined anything. I had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his choices. I reminded him that family is not proven by who takes the most, but by who shows up when it costs them something. Sophia never came. Instead, she tried to rebuild her image online, posting motivational quotes about resilience and private struggles. But people had started asking questions she couldn't answer without exposing herself further. Invitations stopped coming. Friendships cooled. The curated life she had built cracked slowly, not with drama, but with quiet exclusion. Julia kept paying. Month after month, on time, sometimes early. The messages that accompanied the payments changed too. They became reflective, thoughtful, occasionally painful. She admitted that losing her parents' lies had hurt more than losing my money ever could. She told me she no longer blamed me for missing her graduation, because she understood that respect is not something you demand after the fact. It's something you protect while you still have it. 1 year later, she sent the final payment. No excuses, no delay. Just the full amount cleared. Along with it came a message thanking me, not for the money, but for teaching her the lesson her parents never did, that integrity costs something, and shortcuts always send the bill later. I replied with a short acknowledgement and nothing more. Some relationships don't need to be rebuilt to be resolved. Elijah and Sophia remained absent. Holidays passed without invitations, birthdays without messages. At first, I noticed the emptiness they left behind. Then gradually, I noticed the peace. I slept better. I worked better. I stopped bracing myself for the next request. The next emergency that wasn't really an emergency, just entitlement dressed as need. What stayed with them, I knew, was memory. They couldn't rewrite what happened. They couldn't tell the story without bumping into the truth. Every time someone mentioned college tuition, generosity, or sacrifice, my name sat quietly in the room between them, unspoken but heavy. That was the real revenge, not anger, not shouting, but permanence. I learned something too. Being soft-hearted does not mean being spineless. Kindness without boundaries invites exploitation, but kindness with limits teaches respect. I didn't win by destroying anyone. I won by choosing myself, by refusing to be the silent foundation everyone stood on without gratitude. In the end, I didn't need an apology tour, a reconciliation dinner, or public validation. I had clarity. I had my dignity. And my family learned a lesson they will carry far longer than any degree, that when you mistake generosity for weakness, you eventually meet the cost of that mistake in full, with interest. Please like, share and subscribe for more stories. Thank you.